now, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our very special guest today, the legendary and the Right Honorable Mr. Brian Mulroney. Brian Mulroney led the Progressive Conservative Party to the largest victory in Canadian history, becoming the 18th Prime Minister of Canada, and was the first Conservative Prime Minister in 100 years to win successive majority governments. His government introduced bold new initiatives such as the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement, the North America Free Trade Agreement, the Canada-US Acid Rain Treaty, and the Canada-US Arctic Cooperation Agreement. Prime Minister Mulroney's government also introduced a wave of privatizations and low inflation policy, historic tax reform, extensive deregulation, and expenditure reduction policies that have served as the basis of Canada's impressive economic performance till this very day. Since retiring from politics, he has rejoined the Montreal law firm of Norton Rose Fulbright as a senior partner, as well as serving as the chairman of the board of Quebecor and as the director of the Blackstone Group, whose chairman and CEO Steve Schwartzman recently joined us for Lunches with Legends. And of course, he's the director of Acreage Holdings. He also serves as the chairman of International Advisory Board of Barrick Gold Corporation, is a trustee of the Montreal Heart Institute Foundation and the International Advisory Board of HEC Montreal. So Mulroney has been awarded Canada's highest honors, and the recognition of his leadership has been heralded far beyond our borders. He was the first non-American in history to be honored with eulogizing a US president, particularly President Ronald Reagan and First Lady Nancy Reagan, as well as President George H.W. Bush at their funerals. And besides the United States, he has been the recipient of the highest honors from nations around the world, such as France, Ukraine, South Africa, Japan, etc. And he has received honorary degrees and awards from universities far and wide, as well as the recipient of the Global Citizen Award by the United Nations Association. If I were to list all of the awards Mr. Mulroney received, we wouldn't have any time left to hear him talk today. So allow me to simply say that this man has achieved more in one lifetime than most people can achieve in 10. And it is such a profound pleasure and privilege to have the Right Honorable Mr. Brian Mulroney with us today. Interviewing the Right Honorable Brian Mulroney will be our dear friend, Walied Soliman. Walied is the chair of Norton Rose Fulbright, who's today's sponsor, and widely regarded as one of Canada's leading lawyers in significant and complex M&A transactions, proxy battles, dealing with boards, hostile bidders, activists, and corporate finance in general. He has been named top 40 lawyer under 40 in Canada and was the only lawyer featured in the Globe and Mail's report on Business Magazine Power 50 list. And of course, and he's been ranked among the top lawyers worldwide. Now, aside from his extraordinary business achievements, Walied has also been a remarkable civic leader. He has was mandated by the Government of Ontario to chair the Capital Markets Modernization Task Force. He also sits on the boards of Black North Initiative Against Anti-Black Racism, Ryerson University, and Toronto Sick Kids Hospital Foundation. And he's been chosen by the United Nations Association to be its Global Citizen Laureate for his professional merit and service to the community. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to welcome these two extraordinary individuals to our virtual stage for this exciting conversation. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Mo. Well, thank you very much, Mo. And let me just start off by saying how much of a privilege it is for us to be associated with your organization, Mo. The incredible achievements that you've been able to accomplish for family offices and in the capital markets generally over the past decade have been well recognized. And of course, your philanthropic efforts have really blown away the community. So thank you very much, and thank you to all those who are participating. Let me jump right into this. It's always such an honor to speak to Prime Minister Mulroney. It's really rare for us as Canadians to have the privilege of having somebody who's lived as full a life as Prime Minister Mulroney, who has had the experiences he's had, and to learn something from it. So let's just jump right into it, Prime Minister. For those of us and most of the audience is here in Canada. Most of us are still in lockdown. Many of us have our children at home or grandchildren at home. Many of us haven't been able to get a haircut since, if you're in Ontario, you haven't been able to get a haircut since November. And there's a lot of nervousness that maybe Canada has taken a hard reputational hit here. I know that Mo, and certainly we hear from senior business leaders and significant families every day trying to figure out if maybe they should leave Canada. What do you think? Canada's taken a hard reputational hit, or are we maybe exaggerating a little bit of this in our own minds here in Canada?
Well, as you know, thank you to both of you. But as you know, I'm in the United States today, trying to get home on the 15th of May. So I've heard a lot of comments about everyone and every country while down here. Yes, Canada has taken a reputational hit. The comments down here tend to be, and this is with elected officials and business leaders down here around Palm Beach. The comments seem to be that we were slow off the mark, very slow off the mark in the procurement of the vaccines. And that is blamed specifically at the federal government. The other is that when we were talking to President Biden, when the government was talking to President Biden, and he's going to hive off some of their vaccines to ship them to Canada, principally in Mexico. This is not a position in which Canada has been in before, as essentially as a mendicant. So it's an unpleasant thing to hear and to see on American television and the BBC. The United Kingdom has done very well. The Americans, as you can see, are doing very well. They have over 50% of the whole population covered. The United Kingdom is the same situation basically in Europe. We're down, way down the pack, the list of successful countries, which is most unusual for a prosperous and successful international country like Canada. That said, I have to say, and I said it when I had a call from the Prime Minister not so long ago, I acknowledged right off the bat that this is unique in our history. I don't know of another Canadian Prime Minister who has been called upon to deal with a matter this complex and this hurtful to the country, in the sense that while we all had to deal with some crises and challenges, none of us had to deal, that I'm aware of, had to deal with a crisis where the victims, the Canadians, are dying every day right in front of us. And that's because no one has had to deal with this kind of a terrible catastrophe. So we have to put some water in our wine when we're talking about the responsibility of various governments, be they the federal government or the provincial governments. I noticed today, for example, that Nova Scotia, which had done brilliantly, probably the best in Canada for the first while, yesterday had to shut down the whole province because they had the equivalent of 63 or 83 new cases last night. Well, you know, you win some and you lose some, because what happened is apparently is that Ontario and Nova Scotia and others are being hit by another wave, and that had not existed in when it first started off, or in the second part of the problem, when it appeared that we were going to be successful in beating it back. Here we are again. So I think we have to cut the leaders some slack on this. The Premier of Ontario and the Premier of Nova Scotia. Look at it in Alberta. And so, yeah, we've taken a big reputational hit. There's no doubt about it. Both internally, Canadians are not proud of what the hell's going on and what has gone on. That said, it's only fair that we as I say, cut them some slack, because this has never happened before. No prime minister or no premier has been called upon to deal with this. And so, yeah, I think that's the situation. But I do think we're going to obviously come out of this. I'm in Florida now. This is like the wild, wild west going on here. Everything's wide open, the restaurants, the bars, everything. Everyone's back to school, everyone's back to work. Now, the question is, will Floridians be surprised by a huge kick in the pants if there's a fourth wave? And what impact will that have? So I think we're in a situation collectively where no one seems to have a clue what the ultimate resolution will be, but I'm optimistic with what I see, and it may take until the autumn or even a little bit later, but I'll pay any reasonable price just to be around, at the end of this challenging situation for us all.
Well, I'm going to get to that in a second because I do want to hear your predictions on the future, but let me just continue on the Canadian scene. One of the things that I think we all take great pride in Canada, and that you took great pride in during your premiership, is the social contract that this country offers. And this country ensures that we have a national health care system, an education system that's accessible to all. We don't allow people to, in their most difficult times, to go without their basic needs. I think one of the fears that a lot of the listeners have, Prime Minister, is that we're entering a period with these astounding deficits and this significant growth in our debt, where the social contract will fray. There will be higher taxes beyond the tolerance level of folks that have been happy to pay high taxes for quite a period of time. And there will be a reduction in services for those that the social contract was meant to protect. How important is that social contract in this country? And is it a solvable problem over the coming years? Or are we destined to have a fraying of that social contract that's so dear to us in this country?
No, we're not. The social contract can and will be maintained. The deficit appears to be colossal, which it is. And the addition to the national debt is stupendous. But look, we've been there before. When I took over from Pierre Trudeau, the deficit was 8.7% of GDP. The deficit, even with these major expenditures, is less than that, substantially less than that today. I had a 16% interest rate problem that I inherited, but today it's up 16%. And the interest rates today are very, very low. The government's probably borrowing at a maximum of 2%. And so the answer, I think, Walied, is that the safety net, and I agree with you, its importance, because it's one thing for some of us to be deeply affected by this matter. But, we all are able to live through this on our income or our economic opportunities and so on. But what about the guy out in Ville Laval who's got 3 kids and he's living in a 2-bedroom apartment? And in the middle of this last July, he lost his job. That's where the safety net kicks in, and it will be maintained. I think that the government is doing largely the right thing, because deficits and debt at this moment, given what you said about our undertaking to provide for the citizens who need it most, that undertaking cannot be broken, and it won't be broken, because the way that I think we're going to come out of this is we're going to grow our way out of it. The economy, well, I think when I was there, we had about 26 million people in Canada. Now we're on our way to 40 million. Next year, it'll probably be 39 and be 40. This is a big difference. So we'll have trouble paying down such a colossal debt over time, and it's going to take a long time. But our growth will be substantial. Our economic growth will probably exceed 6-7% for a number of years, and then we'll be back hopefully to 4 to 5%. And the proceeds of that growth will enable us with low interest rates to work our way out of this in a manner that doesn't compromise the integrity of Canada in respect of supplying support for all of those programs that assist middle-class Canadians and lower class economically Canadians. So I think we're going to be okay when this thing ends.
One of the things that this pandemic has also exposed, and maybe it's because we've all just been spending a lot more time on social media, is regional disparities in this country. And it feels like the country is regionally stressed in ways that, at least in my lifetime, hasn't been as bad as it is right now. We have Western Canadians who are feeling extremely alienated. Prime Minister, not able to build their pipelines, losing their oil and gas jobs in a way that is unprecedented. We have the Ontario manufacturing sector leaving the province. The issues that continue in Quebec and Eastern Canada. Are these regional differences and these regional tensions, are they just par for the course for Canada, or are they at a different level than you've seen them in your career?
Well, we have regional tensions and serious regional problems over the 154-year history of our country. It's a regional country. I mean, we have the second largest land mass in the world, 5,000-mile Vancouver to Newfoundland, the equivalent of a border. And, we only have 40 million people in a country like this, which is why I've been talking for a number of months anyway about the reform of our immigration situation, where we've got to attract immigrants to this country. They provide dynamism, they provide loyalty, they provide a sense of the Canadian entrepreneur at his best, and they bring new wealth and new opportunities to Canada. We must reform our immigration policies and admit more and more. I'm in favor of a 100 million population for Canada by the end of the century, by the turn of the century. Then you're talking. Then you're starting to make sense for a country this big, and to maintain a growing foreign policy impact in commercial matters like trade agreements and in political clout at the United Nations, at the G7, and so on. So look, in Alberta, for example, now, and in Western Canada, there's a great feeling that central governments has left Alberta, has let Alberta down in this moment of great crisis for them. And there's some truth to that. A lot of provinces have been living off the largesse of Alberta's equalization payments now for a long time. So that breeds very deep concerns out there. And yet, our problems are homemade to the following extent. For example, when we had the opportunity at the beginning of the Harper government, which is now, 15 or 16 years ago, the government came in led by a Westerner, Mr. Harper, who tried to make some progress in this area. And yet, I don't think a foot of pipe was laid during the Harper period and subsequently. Then Biden cancels the XL pipeline. And there have been other cancellations due to the difficulty that we have in approving projects, major projects, construction projects, and the transport of oil and gas, which is so important to the West. We haven't done anything to help them. Now, I realize we have the Aboriginal opposition, the environmentalists, and so on. and the problems out west. But there's a way for the Prime Minister to convene these people. I mean, I did it with the tax reform of the GST and with the free trade agreement and with NAFTA. You can be sure that there were lots of opposition to what I was trying to do, but you have to bring them together. And what you have to provide is leadership to deal with make sure that it's a fair deal for the Aboriginals, for the environmentalists, and for the provinces whose resources have to get to market. And we failed them on that. It can be done. It's a doable thing. I know there are lots of obstacles, and I know that it's not as easy as it looks, or I may make it sound. I don't intend to do that. But all I can do is tell you that having been there and having negotiated internationally and negotiated with the provinces on all kinds of items, it's doable. Canadians are not a bunch of crackpots. They understand and they want to help Western Canada. But how the hell are they going to do it if everyone is obstructed from bringing the solution to fruition by internal opposition? So what are we going to do? Sit here and say, well, we couldn't get together with the environmentalists and with the Aboriginals, therefore the trillions of dollars that we could make as a nation from Alberta getting back into business, we got to help Alberta. We got to help Western Canada. They're the ones suffering now. So yes, there are major problems, but we've seen them before and they are solvable. You know, Bill Clinton used to say, leadership is the capacity to look around the corner of history just a little bit. Well, look around the corner of history now, assuming the solution to the pandemic, which is going to happen. You look around the corner of history for Canada, what do you see? I see a country of enormous prosperity to be, and a vision for a very prosperous, self-sustaining, assertive on the international level, a country which is admired by people around the world, and millions of people trying to get in here because they know what Canada can offer. But if you don't provide the leadership, and so this means, what is leadership? You want to play golf and you want to make everybody but yourself popular, just go ahead, but you don't get anything done. If, however, you understand that genuine leadership is going to bother people. Canadians don't like change. They're resistant to change. So what are you going to do? Say, well, the people are resistant to it, therefore I'm not going to do it. But it's in the national interest that you do it. So you've got to be ready to sustain unpopularity. Anyway, there shouldn't be popularity polls in Canada. There should be achievement polls. You should, as you go along, get measured by what you do, not whether you're 7 points up in the Gallup or down. Who gives a hell? Look, before the 1984 election, just before the television debates, Prime Minister Turner had a 14-point lead over me. We go into the television debates the next days, I'm 18 points ahead. What the hell happened? Well, we had a debate and it was all about leadership. And the Canadians decided that maybe they should give me a little bit of a chance. That's what happened. So what happens? I win the largest majority in the history of Canada. And why did I then drop? Well, I started to do things. And every time you do anything controversial, people are irritated at you. And so you start to drop. But as you're dropping, your achievements are really going like this. Slowly but surely, they go up. So I think it's an internal problem that you can quickly characterize as leadership. Leadership. This is the only, look, Sir John A. Macdonald, look the hell he had to deal with the morning after the July 1st, 1867. What did he have to? Here is 4 million people, a country of 4 million people, and with the Americans at 40 million at the time, with an army that could march into Georgia just as sure as it could into Canada if they had wanted, or if we hadn't been able to. So what did Macdonald do? Macdonald, with his bare hands, built a country. and his vision. And he said, I don't have the money. I don't have the influence to get this in New York or London, but I am going to build a railway from one coast to the other, 3,000 miles of steel. And that is going to bind this country together. Now, without Sir John's determination and courage, we don't have a country today. We're sitting around talking about something else. So the solution, I think, is simple. You got to have leaders who are going to ignore the, Canadian politicians or leaders. They are not elected to win a popularity contest because they're already there. Once they get elected, they shouldn't think they're in a perpetual election campaign. They've got to do not things that are going to enhance their popularity, but things that are going to strengthen the base and the outreach and the power of Canada. And you can't get that you can't make an omelet without breaking eggs. And this is what the leadership of Canada has to do. Now, I acknowledge that it's not as easy as perhaps I'm making it sound. But as I said on one occasion, I've had the privilege of seeing Canada and the world from the highest mountaintops. And I've seen it as well, the Valley of Defeat. And when you're in the Valley of Defeat, people don't recognize that your policies, if they're good for Canada, they're coming to fruition slowly. So they don't make the hit parade in polls, but they make the hit parade in history with achievements. You may have noticed that all the people who said in 1993 and thereafter, I'm going to get rid of the free trade agreement, I'm going to get rid of the GST, I'm going to get rid of the this and the that. Nothing has changed, not a bit. They haven't changed a comma in any of those major policies in 35 or 40 years now. So Jeffrey Simpson used to say that durability is one of the key measurements of good policy. Well, I'll take that. 40 years later, they're all still there. So leadership is what we need. And I think we're going to get some of it.
Well, let's talk a little bit about leadership. I think, participants in this call and Canadians across the country are yearning for leadership. We haven't had leadership that has brought in transformational change in this country in decades. What is the last free trade agreement, GST, to make sure that we reduce our deficits, acid rain treaty? Where has Canada taken a leadership role to establish and ensure that it's part of the G7? What is it about politics that's maybe changed in this country over the past several decades that has either disallowed our political leaders from making that type of transformational change, or disqualified people with the will from running? What is your observation on that?
Well, my observation is that the country, not just Canada, but other countries as well, but particularly us, the leadership has been consumed by popularity polls. The whole thing is driven by the polls. And that is the most misleading gauge of leadership in history. There are all kinds of very popular leaders who ended their career with sadness because as they look back, they hadn't accomplished a damn thing. And why? Because given the choice between ongoing popularity and the sycophancy of the media, Joe Blow, and take the conservative leader now, Aaron O'Toole. Oh boy, he's in bad shape. Oh, why? Because some jerk ran a poll that said he was running. But we'll see what happens in the campaign. O'Toole, and he's a very significant leader with tremendous talent and opportunity. And I think that he's going to do one hell of a lot better than people say and the polls say. look, let's just go to the United States for a second. Donald Trump, by any gauge, should have won the last election. Joe Biden didn't win the election. Donald gave it to him. Because I think that successful political leaders have to have two things: substance and style. And I think that Mr. Trump won a lot of battles in the area of substance, but he lost it in the question of style, personal style. Like in politics, everything has a consequence, what you do or you say. When Donald Trump said in 2015 that John McCain was not a hero because he had been captured and put in jail in North Korea for 5.5 years. Now, apart from being very insolent and misleading, and I like Donald Trump, and I admire many of the qualities that he brought to the portrait. But just to indicate, so he says this in 2015. Oh, here we are, election night in 2020. So we're all watching the television, and out of the blue, a conservative state, a Republican state for decades, like Arizona, goes Democrat. The Republicans lose the state, and they lose 2 senators for the Democrats, which makes the difference right now in the tie in the US Senate. Why did that happen? Well, I'll tell you why it happened. Because Cindy McCain and half of Arizona were up in arms with what President Trump said about John McCain. Cindy McCain, the very powerful and much admired widow of John McCain, was out campaigning for Joe Biden. So that statement of style, that statement was his undoing. And he made many others too. He would have won that election had he not performed, the way he did, and hadn't given Joe Biden Cindy McCain, for God's sake, John's widow, in Arizona. And look what happened. Had he had Arizona that night, it was not just the 16 votes, electoral college votes from Arizona. He lost them. And Joe Biden got them. So that's a switch of 32 votes. And with that, Joe Biden was on the way to the White House. So leadership is a very important aspect of our human life. And it's not just in politics. Successful business leaders, university leaders, healthcare leaders, this kind of thing, very important. The whole concept of leadership. But on the political and public policy side, leadership is the capacity to take those decisions, but also the strength to endure the withering criticism. Hell, I remember when there were all those groups, the universities and the media and the liberals and the NDP and everybody, the trade unions. In the 1988 election for free trade that I had done with President Reagan, I used to say that at a given point, the impact of this on me was so powerful that my support when I launched the campaign was down to members of my immediate family. And that I remember I used to say that I called my mother and she put me on hold. And I was paying for the call. Well, but you have to keep going in spite of the criticism. I can remember an incident that happened in late October with one of the leading columnists at the time for Southern News. I could name him, but I won't. And he wrote a column saying, we just leaving Southern Ontario to head for Ajax on the way back to Ottawa. And the Prime Minister Mulroney has got 3 or 4 or 5 meetings along the way, kind of thing. And he said, I am delighted to be along for this. because I know full well that this is the last campaign we'll ever see of Brian Mulroney, thank God, because he's heading for certain defeat.
Wow.
And so,
Wow.
well, here I am reading this, and what am I supposed to do? Agree with this guy? Or say, buzz off. I'm going to win this election. I don't care what they're saying, because I'm getting a reaction from the people out here that we're going to win. And so it requires if you want to find yourself in unpleasant company, try the House of Commons, the Prime Minister's question period at any day of the week, but also the journalists who are traveling with you. It's enough to discourage anybody. And so, you know, you have to have a lot of confidence and some courage. But most of all, I told my caucus and my cabinet regularly, if this policy, this controversial policy, there's only one criteria, as far as I'm concerned, of leadership. The question is this good for Canada in the long run? Not, is this good for my popularity in the short run? If it's not good for Canada, we don't do it. If it's good for Canada, we're bloody well going to do it, no matter what the hell the media or anybody else says, because this is what we were elected to do. We've just come from an election which we won, another majority government. The people have spoken. They didn't tell me as Prime Minister, well, you go there and you bring in these radical policies or these big changes to Canada. But look, you do it, have the courage to do it. However, if the media or the opposition parties say, don't do it because we don't like it, well, then you violated the trust that we gave you when you ran for election. So I don't want to sound like a Nostradamus on this, but it's the only way. And you've got to have in Ottawa, in a country like this, which is officially bilingual, you've got to make sure that you're carrying the English-speaking part of Canada, you're carrying the French-speaking part. Otherwise, you get yourself into big trouble down the way. So that's my view of it.
Let's move on to the country you're in right now, the United States.
Yeah.
Canada's had a frayed relationship during the Trump era. I know that you played a big role in helping ensure that we had calm waters through some very, very difficult periods between Prime Minister Trudeau and President Trump. It seems like there's a better relationship right now, although I think many would think it's a relationship of some indifference to Canada. How important is that relationship, and what do our leaders need to do to ensure that it is an enduring relationship and one that allows a future prime minister to speak at not one but two presidents' eulogies?
Yeah, you're speaking about a vital relationship that must exist at all times between the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of Canada. Prime Minister of Canada has two major files on his desk that only he can deal with. He can't delegate this. First is national unity, and the second is the Canada-US relationship. We now have, with NAFTA, for example, we have which the Canada-US free trade agreement that I did with President Reagan was the foundational instrument that allowed us to do NAFTA all those years ago. And a lot of people, again, said this was a disaster. Mulroney had wanted to be the 51st governor of the state in the free trade election, and now he wants to be the emperor of Latin America. You remember our critics on that one. So what is NAFTA today, for example? Because of the relationship, and I'll come back momentarily to this, because of the relationship between President Bush and myself, and eventually Carlos Salinas. Well, NAFTA today, all those years later, is this. With 500 million people from three countries, the three NAFTA countries, representing about 7% of the world's population. We generate 29% of the world's wealth. And we have generated in excess of 65 million new jobs, including millions and millions in Canada, although the United States was the greatest beneficiary of it. But to give you an idea of how it works and why you need this relationship, there are about 200 countries at the United Nations now, and every one of them is trying to get into the Oval Office to see the president. Believe me, I never had that problem. Anytime I wanted to talk to the president, I'd pick up the phone, call him. He'd do the same thing. When I would go down and see President Reagan, President Bush, or all kinds of times on unofficial visits. Colin Powell used to say when he was National Security Advisor to the president, he said the only person that we really had problems with was Prime Minister Mulroney, because he said Reagan loved the guy. And we had to keep them separate when he was down here, because if he spoke to him privately, President Reagan would give him the roof off the Capitol. So this was not what we had in mind. And so, you know, we Howard Baker and I, he said, would work to keep Mulroney away from him when he was there. They were having all kinds of meetings, and we never knew what the hell was going on. and that's the kind of relationship you would hope for, because the presidents I worked with at the time, President Reagan, President Bush, and President Clinton, were remarkable leaders, extraordinary leaders. And they valued the Canadian relationship because of the friendships that we had developed. And so that's why we got the free trade agreement, we got NAFTA, we got the Canada-US Acid Rain Treaty, which was an extraordinary thing for governments to do. And then I got the Arctic Sovereignty Agreement with President Reagan. That was all based on their respect and affection for Canada. If you lose that, if you lose access to the Oval Office, you got trouble. And what's happening now? Who was the President Biden? And he is much more friendly to Canada. And I always say that Justin Trudeau has a much more important job, difficult job in that area than I had, because I was dealing with Ronald Reagan and George Bush and Bill Clinton, and he would have to deal with Donald Trump, who was hostile to Canada, really, as you saw from his comments and what he did. And here we've got the first official visit to the United States, the Prime Minister of Japan. What the hell is going on here? They're a puny little trading partner with the United States compared to us. The three of us are now doing approximately $1.7 trillion a year in trade between the NAFTA partners, the largest such trade in the history of the world. And we got the Prime Minister of Japan going before us on a state visit last week. This is what happens when you don't have an excellent relationship with the President of the United States. And so I'll end this part of it by simply telling you what happened. I got this relationship with Reagan. We do the free trade agreement. 5 years later, George Bush comes to the view, and I agree with it, that we should expand this to Mexico. So we're working on that. All of a sudden, I hear that the president is contemplating a hub and spoke thing where he's got a relationship with Canada, free trade. The Americans are in the middle. And then he does another bilateral with Mexico, and that's going to be called NAFTA. So I hear about this, and I go down to the Oval Office, and I said, George, tell me about this thing. What are you up to here? Because I said, I have a privileged relationship with the United States because of our free trade agreement, and you cannot go off and do a bilateral with Mexico that could dilute the impact of our situation, say in energy or something, whatever, automobile production. You can't do this. And he said, well, Brian, he said, I'm sorry to tell you this, but look, Carla Hills, who, by the way, was a wonderful woman. Carla Hills is my trade representative, USTR. And Carla says that this is the way for the United States to make progress, is to have a bilateral with Canada and a bilateral with them, and we're in the middle. Well, if you like, you'll forgive the vulgarity, but if you'd like to hear what actually happened between Bush and me in the Oval Office, I said to him, George, I know Carla very well, and she's a wonderful person and a very talented USTR. But I don't give a shit what Carla says. I care what you say. And I'm telling you that this would be a hostile act towards Canada. And I'm not going to put up with it. So he said just before lunch, we had lunch, he said, well, Brian, let me think about this for a little while. 2 days later, I get a call from Jim Baker, who was the Secretary of State. And he said to me, he used to call me PM. I don't know why he did that. He never said Brian or Prime Minister, always said PM. He said, PM, I've just been talking to the President and Carla, and it's not going to be a hub and spoke deal. You're going to be in the middle with the President. So
that's fabulous.
That's some of the kind of now how did I get away with that? Because Bush and I, when he was Vice President, I never went to Washington to see the President without going over to visit with George Bush at his residence, the Naval Observatory. I always saw him. I always included him. He would come to see me. I'd invite him up. I had dinners for him in Canada when he was Vice President. So that relationship, including me and my family, going to Kennebunkport every Labor Day for the last 30 years.
Wow.
Well, this builds up a relationship because no one there wants to do anything that irritates the President, because their careers will be cut short if they get on the wrong side of the President's will. And so they made it possible for me to enjoy Canada, to enjoy these successes, because they were kind and friendly. They knew they were the big kid on the block. They knew I was a smaller guy, but they also valued the friendship and the support that we gave them. The Gulf War, the NATO, the Cold War with the Russians and so on. Canada supported them 100% on anything that related to democracy and freedom. And that appealed to the presidents of the United States. And I was not, you remember, they used to criticize me so much in Canada in the Liberal and NDP sphere, because they would say, no, Mulroney's so pro-American, he's Reagan's poodle, and he's this and he's that, every insult. And I never got offended by it. I figured I was going to use it against them in the next election campaign, which I did, because they misread the Canadian people. They thought that every Canadian, a big bunch of us anyway, that we were anti-American, fundamentally anti-American. And I said in the 1988 campaign, I am going to prove in this election campaign that there are not enough anti-Americans in Canada to elect a dog catcher, let alone a prime minister. So,
you got a second majority.
That was it. So I think that the relationship is so important. And maybe Justin and his relationship with Joe Biden, whom I've known for 35 years, and he's a gentleman and a good guy. But Justin has to remind him who his best friend in the world is, and it's Canada.
Yeah.
And he shouldn't put up with any, perhaps he's not, but he should remind Biden, hey, you're talking to the greatest friend you've had in the world and the greatest friend you've had for 200 years. I used to tell them down there that there hasn't been a shot fired across this border in 155 years. The only trouble we had was when a bunch of drunken Irishmen came up and tried to cause, the Fenians tried to cause us problems in the War of 1812. I said, the fact of the matter is, in that war, we captured Detroit and we gave it back.
Let me switch, Prime Minister, to Canada's global position. There's a There are Canadians that would say to you, look, we need to take a strong human rights stance against China, and damn the torpedoes, we need to be on the right side of history. There are others who would say to you, ignoring China and their economic prowess and how they're growing, and worse, insulting China, is without question to the detriment of our national interest. How should Canada be interacting with China?
Well, I think that given the massive problems that we have, and everybody knows that the China we once knew, I knew, is no longer the China that's there. And so I think there's a parallel between the end of the Cold War having been won without a shot being fired. In those days, we all got together. We knew that Reagan was the leader of the pack, given the extraordinary economy and support, military support of the United States. So we got together, the G7, with NATO, and with powers like Japan in Asia. And it was agreed, not in a formal sense. There was no document signed, but everybody knew what we were doing. And we were going to send Reagan off as our representative with total solidarity of all of us in support of this. And that Reagan was going to say to Gorbachev and the rest of them, this is an evil empire. And I'm speaking for not just myself, I'm speaking now for the free world. And we are not going to put up with this. And if you threaten us with nuclear missiles, it'll be the last threat you'll ever utter in your lives. And they knew when they were talking to him that there were hundreds of millions of people with powerful economies supporting President Reagan 100%. France, the United Kingdom, Germany, Italy, Japan, all of these, Canada, of course. These are not what in Quebec they refer to as toothpick economies. These were big, powerful nations. And he spoke for everybody. So guess what happened? We won the Cold War. If Canada goes to China and has a hissy fit, guess what's going to happen? Zero. That's what's going to happen. Chinese won't move at all. And what has to be reconstructed is the relationship that Reagan struck with everybody. That President Biden, when he meets the Chinese for the first time, that the Chinese know that he is supported by all of those powerful countries themselves. And the Chinese can't compromise their relationships with everybody in the world. Where the hell are they going to sell their products? Who's going to listen to these? Look at it they're doing in the Taiwan Straits right now, and building islands in the seas to extend hegemony over the Philippines and over all of the countries in that area. There are 19 countries joining China. They have to be told, not in a hostile way. They have to be told the facts of life. That we, Biden speaking for everybody, we are not going to put up with this. Don't make another move because it's not going to work. So why don't, rather than do that, why don't we sit down in a reasonable way and agree upon a solution to all these problems? By the way, those 2 Canadians that you arrested opposite, they come out.
Yeah.
They come out right now. That's the only way, I think, anyway.
Yeah.
You may be wrong, but I've lived through a parallel experience. And it's quite a thing, when you consider that there are nuclear missiles pointed at London and Paris, Washington, New York, and so on, without a shot being fired.
Now, sir, I know it's 1:26. I have one last question for you that hopefully you could give us a very quick answer to, which is there's a lot of uncertainty among the listeners today about the future. Are we going to go in, are interest rates going to go up? Are we going to get into some wild recession? Timber's at an all-time high. Is that going to continue? Are you optimistic about Canada and the United States' economic outlook? Or are you pessimistic? Are you neutral? What do you feel?
I am optimistic with no doubts.
Wow.
The only problem on the horizon that I see is with all the cash floating around from the central banks, but mostly from the Fed, that we have a possibility of a growth in inflation in the third quarter, I think, of this year. And although other people disagree with that and say it'll be tamped down enough, but that's the worst thing I see for now. All of a sudden, however, when the cash stops flowing from the Fed, I've seen very important and talented people talk this year about a 10% market correction after the second quarter, but a return to our new normal by the end of the year. So I am very confident that we're not going to run into a bad storm on our way to greater prosperity. And I think that that's exactly what is going to happen. That's a simple way, maybe an inelegant way of saying that I'm a guy who I don't see any prospect of what we need in Canada. We've got to get serious, however, not so much about spending controls for the moment. Productivity. The only way a nation like Canada creates new wealth, and not two ways, there's only one: productivity enhancement. And I've been pushing this idea. I looked at the last budget, there's not a damn thing in there that enhances productivity that I can see anyway. So with those concerns out there, I still think, Walied, to all your colleagues here, that Canada has quite a brilliant future.
With that optimistic note, I'll pass it back to you, Mo, and thank you very much, Prime Minister. Mo.
Thank you.
That was just fantastic. Prime Minister Mulroney, thank you for joining us today and for sharing your incredible stories and insights with us. And Walied, thank you for hosting this truly wonderful conversation. I really can't tell you how much we appreciate your generosity of time and wisdom, and hope we have the pleasure of doing this again. And for all of our participants, thank you so much for joining us. If you have not yet donated, please do so by going to the donate page, and help us continue strengthening pediatric mental health in our communities. Thank you again to everyone for your support of Lunches with Legends. We are so deeply grateful for your participation, and wishing each of you and all of those on the line a wonderful day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mo, and thanks to all your listeners. Thank you very much. Thank you, Walied.
Thank you, Prime Minister.